We're going to be doing the top 10 teachings of the daf on Brachos, daf Lamed Gimel, 33rd page of Brachot. They are the following. Number one, even if a snake is coiled around your foot, the Mishnah tells us on 32b not to interrupt your prayer. Is that really the case? Actually, I was told when I was a kid, when I learned it, I think my father told me, oh, that's only if it's not a dangerous snake. If it's a dangerous snake, of course you could interrupt your prayer. So let's hope he's correct. But we'll learn a little bit about that. Number two, the story of Chanina Ben dosa, who killed a baby dragon. Actually, it wasn't a baby dragon. It was some mythical creature, like a baby dragon. And the difference between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi in terms of that story, and why I think the Bavli has an important hidden message in why it's telling us the story here. The Yerushalmi has an obvious connection, and the Bavli has a hidden connection that's very important to what prayer is all about, not just the laws of when and when not to interrupt prayer. Number three, the Gemara says that somebody who lacks das is part of our mental faculties, some type of discretion, understanding. It's often translated as knowledge. Somebody who's lacking in dat, the Gemara tells us, it is forbidden to have compassion on them, and that's very problematic. Obviously, we're taught that we must be compassionate. So how is it that there's a whole group of people out there, and there's probably lots of them, that we're forbidden to have compassion on? It doesn't make much sense. Okay. Number three, what was the original institution of havdalah? It's not exactly the way we do it today. What changed? Number four, actually that is number four. Number five is the Gemara tells us whoever makes an unnecessary blessing, they violate the prohibition that we're going to read, or we would have read in the 10 Commandments on Shavuot, not to take God's name in vain. And the question is, really? Just because you made a blessing that you didn't need to make, you weren't careful, you made it a second time because you forgot that you made it the first time, for that you really would get that major violation? We're going to discuss if that's a real thing or kind of a rabbinic enactment that links it up with a biblical prohibition, but it isn't actually biblically prohibited or not. Number six, if you ate before havdalah, if you didn't make havdalah in the Amidah and Atachonen, and you didn't make havdalah with the wine, and you ate, what do you do and why? Number seven, the halacha is sometimes a little bit mysterious in that the rabbis don't advise you this is what you should do, but if you come to them and you tell them this is what you did do, they'll tell you, okay, then it's okay. Why isn't it everything just clear cut? This is the law and that's it. It's a little bit of a discussion in the Gemara about certain times where there's a distinction between the law or but not necessarily what the rabbis will tell you is the law. They'll only answer a question if it comes to them, but they won't advise you to do it like that. And other kind of rabbinic toolkit things that are part of what a rabbi does. And maybe I'll touch on whether a rabbi is replaceable. Like, can we replace a rabbi through artificial intelligence, which would be just to collect to process all the information, all the rabbinic learning in a computer, and have the computer replace the rabbi? Because after all, a computer could know a lot more than any one person? Or is there a human element in the rabbinic response that would preclude a robot becoming a rabbi? This is actually a very interesting question. So that's number 7. Number 8 is a debate between Maimonides and Nachmanadies upon the nature of whether being nice to animals is a good thing or maybe a bad thing. Meaning being too nice to animals is, the religion doesn't ask you to do it, and you're just being a pain in the rear by like being a vegan. And you'll find a lot of people who have become Balie Teshuva, and they will be told by their religious friends, their newly religious friends, stop being a vegetarian. A religious Jew can't be a vegetarian or a vegan. And I used to think that was totally wrong, and that those people who said that were totally ignorant. And I still think they're mostly ignorant, but I found something that might support them a tiny bit. So I want to speak in the defense of those who think we don't need to be vegan and that it's not ethical. There's no such thing as ethics of veganism when the Torah doesn't, if the Torah doesn't encourage it, then it's totally unnecessary at best. Or that's not perhaps Nachmanadies. Maimonides, who would say, no, it's great. If you could be a vegan, it could be a vegetarian. That's ideal, but you don't need to, but it would be a nice thing. So we're going to do that as well. And that's number 8. Number 9 is, are you finished giving praise to God? Is the pitfalls of personalized spiritual practice. A story in the Talmud of somebody who tried to praise God on their own, and the rabbis criticized them. Number 10 is, all is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven. And what's the big deal about fear of heaven? On the one hand, it isn't a big deal for Moses. On the other hand, it's the foundation for everything, and that's why it's so important. Okay, those are the top 10, and then we're going to go over them and analyze these top 10 teachings of Brachot, Daf Lamed Gimel 33. Okay, here we go. So first we start off with the first one, which is about the Mishnah having said something very troubling. The Mishnah, actually I was wrong. I said it was on Lamed Beis, Amud Beis, and it isn't. That's how fried my memory is. The Mishnah is actually on Lamed Amud Beis. The Mishnah says that Va'afilo nachash karach al akevo lo yafsik. The Mishnah tells us that even if a snake is, what's the word? Karuch means like it's bound around your ankle, you should not interrupt the tefillah. This is very problematic. The Gemara points out how problematic it is towards the top of the daf that we're doing today, and it says the following. The Gemara says, "Afilu nachash karach al akeva lo yafsik." Amar Rav Sheshes lo shano ela nachash. Rav Sheshes makes a distinction. That's only in regards to a snake. Aval akrev posek. If a scorpion is in your vicinity, definitely if it's on your body, but even if it's, anywhere it is in your vicinity, posek, you interrupt. So the Gemara says, ask the question, Meisvei, this is talking about a woman who we don't want her to be an agunot. We saw her husband fall into a dangerous situation with wildlife. We don't know the verified outcome, but he might have been killed. And can we testify on his behalf that he is dead so that his wife can remarry? So the Gemara says, Meisvei, it's a brisa, Nafo legov arayos. If somebody fell into a lion's den Eid me'in olav, and you didn't see the outcome. You didn't see the lions gore him and kill him. You didn't see. You were in the safari, and the safari kept going. You guys got out. You got out of Dodge, and you left him there. So you can't testify that he's dead in order for his wife to remarry. And Nafal l'chfira maleach nachashim b'akravim. If he fell into a pit that it was full of snakes or scorpions, it says snakes and scorpions, but either one, me'idna love shemes, then you can go ahead and testify that he died. In other words, the assumption is it's halachically a death to fall into a pit of snakes or scorpions. So the question is, it's a death sentence to be in a pit of snakes or scorpions. Why the hell would you continue praying when there's a snake on your body, around your ankle? It's a contradiction. Clearly, you're risking your life, and we know you're not supposed to risk your life for a mitzvah, other than shvicha damim gilei arayot and avodah zara. But other than that, you save your life. So that's the Gemara's question. Very strong question. And the Gemara answers, Shani Hasam Dagav Itzasa Maski. It's different over there in the case of the person who fell into the pit, because he's moving in the pit, so they're going to bite him and kill him. Perhaps you could actually learn that this Gemara isn't just telling you not to interrupt your prayer when there's a snake around your ankle. It's telling you how to best get out of having a snake around your ankle is not to make a rapid movement that would create tension around the snake. I'm not an expert, so you should go and inquire from an expert in wildlife and find out. But perhaps it's trying to warn us not to make a rapid movement. The rapid movement is what kills the man who fell into the pit. That's why you can testify that he's dead, even if you didn't actually see him die. You didn't see what happened with the snakes. So the commentaries make the comment that if the snake looks angry, or the snake is threatened, or the snake is coming towards the person in any attacking type of mode, that of course you should interrupt the prayer. Like I mentioned earlier, when I was a kid, and I think I learned the Mishnahs possibly with my father just said, it's talking about a non-dangerous snake. So I assumed it meant, like a little, a non-poisonous snake. That doesn't seem to be the case in the Gemara. But like I said, if you are feeling any danger, you should obviously interrupt your prayer and remove yourself from the danger, or remove the danger from you. Okay, that's number one. The number two is the story of Chanina Ben dosa, the baby dragon slayer. Let's see, and I want to talk a little bit about the Bavli and the Yerushalmi here. So, just to put this into context a little bit, last week we learned 32 of Brachot, and we learned that there's a kind of unsophisticated level of tefillah that many people use, and not only is it not effective, it leads people to depression, and that's called iyun tefillah. Now, iyun usually means going in depth into something. Yet the Talmud tells us iyun, when it comes to prayer, represents somebody praying with concrete expectations. It's almost like when I now I do a lot of shopping online for basic necessities, just to avoid going to the store when I can. So it's such an interesting balance, because on the one hand, you order all these things. I think today I ordered 20 things and I got like 12 of them, and 4 of them were replaced. I was like, I can't say I'm upset, because the people are risking their life to deliver the things. But on the one hand, so I'm not upset. I'm very happy. But on the other hand, if things were back to normal and I would order 20 things and only get 10 of the things I ordered, I'd be like, what type of company is this? How dare they? This is terrible. So a lot of people do that with prayer. They're like, what the chutzpah that God has. I put in I ordered 20 things from him, and he only delivered 10, and of the 10, 2 of them were not exactly, they were subpar. They complain about the way their prayers are not being answered. That's called iyun tefillah. So the Gemara says, sof lavo lidei mechov lev. Somebody who has that attitude to prayer is going to come to become depressed. I think there's a big part of another religion, Buddhism, that says life is suffering. Meaning, what is that? It's that you are expecting to get a certain recognition, and let me tell you, you're going to have a hard time getting that recognition. So the longer you wait and expect that recognition, the more disappointed you'll be, and you'll sit and suffer in that lack of kavod that never comes, or when it comes, it's too little and too late. So in the Gemara, and that's like a big part of Buddhism. Gemara has a very small line. It says, iyun tefillah. Maybe we should make a bigger deal out of it. Maybe because we don't make a bigger deal, you have a lot of unhappy Jews. Sally, what do you think? You think we have a lot of unhappy Jews because they haven't been taught the secret that not to put too much of an emphasis on concrete expectations if you're praying to be fulfilled? Okay. So that's the Gemara. And why am I telling you this? This is last week's daf in this year. Because it's very important to know that there's an exception to this principle of iyun tefillah causing this heartache. Who's the exception? The exception is Chanina Ben dosa. And the exception is Choni Hamagil. So I'm wondering, I'm not 100% sure. I guess Chanina Ben dosa is and Choni Hamagil are, if not actually the same, they have a very similar story, which is it's a miracle worker. It's somebody who can have concrete expectations of what God will do, who nature will be broken for them. So the story that the Gemara tells us is as follows. And that's why I think the Bavli doesn't say what the Yerushalmi says about when the story happened. I'll tell you the details once I learn it inside with you. Okay. So the Gemara says the following. Maisa b'makom echad. There's a story in this particular place. Shahaya arud. There was a baby dragon. Now, I don't know what the arud is. It's a creature that the Rashi brings down, that a frog or toad had relations with a snake and had a baby. Now, if you ask me, that's a baby dragon, because it's kind of like a lizard, right? Snake, but it's not a lizard. It's a baby dragon, because it's a mythical creature, and Rashi and the other commentaries talk about that. So there was this baby dragon. Again, if somebody has a better translation than baby dragon, it isn't a baby dragon. It's a mythical creature that's like a dragon, but much smaller. Mazik esabias, it was hurting people. So, Bo v'hodiu lo Rabbi Chanina Ben dosa. They let this great sage, Rabbi Chanina Ben dosa, know about this dangerous creature. Amar lahem, he told them, Haru li eschoro, show me its burrow. Haru eschoro, they showed it to him. Nasan akevo al piachor, he put his foot, it's heel by the hole, the burrow. Yatsa v'nashcho v'meis. It came out, it bit him. V'meis osa arud. And that baby dragon died. Nutlo al ksefo. He took it over he slung it over his shoulders. Ve'aviu lebeis hamedrash. She brought it to the study hall. Amar lahem. He said to the students there, Ru'u b'ni, Ru'u banai. Look, my sons. Ein arud memis ela hachet memis. It's not the baby dragon that kills, it's the sin that kills. In other words, normally the human would have died from an interaction, but because Chanina Ben dosa was pure, he had no sin, he didn't die, it just killed the baby dragon. Ba'osa sha'amru oilai la'adam shepaga ba'arud. At that time they said, woe is to a person who meets a baby dragon. Va'oilai la'arud shepaga by Rabbi Chanina Ben dosa. And woe is to a baby dragon who meets Rabbi Chanina Ben dosa. What does the Yerushalmi say? The Yerushalmi says that Rabbi Chanina Ben dosa was in the middle of prayer, and as he prayed, this baby dragon came up towards his leg, and Rabbi Chanina Ben dosa did not bother moving, either because he was in such a mystical state of devotion he didn't notice it, or he didn't care because he was praying and all he did was pray. And the baby dragon creature, whatever it is, bit him, and the baby dragon died. So, in a sense, in the Yerushalmi's version would seem to make more sense in the context. Because the context is talking about interrupting prayer. So it's telling us a baby dragon that you got to run from. Unless you're Rabbi Chanina Ben dosa, you could pray, you don't have to worry because he's a miracle worker. So why is our version different than the Yerushalmi? Other than the obvious answer, which is they had a different text. They had a different, there's a lot of, so many times the Bavli and Yerushalmi are different. I'd like to suggest the following. I'd like to suggest that it's a lishitaso. The Gemara is telling us that that the rule of iyun tefillah doesn't apply to everyone. There's certain tzaddikim that when they pray, they can pray with a certain expectation that God will answer their prayers. The problem is when an average person, like you and I, pray with a concreteness to our prayer, we will end up becoming depressed when we don't get our prayers answered exactly the way we expect them to be answered. Chanina Ben dosa, on the other hand, he's an exception to that, just like he's an exception to the rule of sakana, of danger. He puts his foot specifically, he goes out of his way to find it, and he baits the baby dragon into biting him, but he has mystical powers that bend laws of nature. So that's a little bit about my take on that. That's number 2. Number 3 is a very strange Gemara. The Gemara says, let's take a look at it, that it's asur l'rachem, it's forbidden to have compassion on somebody that doesn't have das. Let's talk a little bit about das to understand it a little better. Das is one of our part of our mental abilities, and I'll talk about it. It's hard to translate into one word. So the Gemara says, it's talking about, the Mishnah tells us about Maskirin Gvurot. I'll read the Mishnah. Maskirin Gvurot Geshamim B'tchias HaMeisim. We read about V'sein Tal Matar, or V'sein. We read about V'sein Bracha, or Mashiv Haruach Amar Geshem, right? Or V'sein Bracha during the second prayer of the Shmon Esrei, which is about Tchias HaMeisim. It's about revival of the dead. V'she'ela b'birchas Hashanim, and then we ask V'sein Tal Matar L'Vracha in Birchas Hashanim, the prayer about the weather and produce and God giving us blessings in our fields. This is talking about in the Shemona Esrei. The havdalah b'chonin hadas. And we make havdalah on Saturday night in the fourth blessing of the Shemona Esrei in chonin hadas. And the Gemara records two opinions that don't agree with the Tanna Kama. Rabbi Akiva Omer. Rabbi Akiva says that Omer b'bracha revius b'fnei atzma, that havdalah in the Shemona Esrei has its own blessing. It's the fourth blessing. And then you start with atachonin after that. It's a separate blessing. And Rabbi Elazar Omer b'hodah. Rabbi Elazar says we say it as part of the modim. Hodah. So the Gemara says that Amar Ab Ami Gedola Dea Shenitna Betchilas Bracha Shal. This idea of type of mental ability of knowledge is great. That's why it's put in the beginning of the prayers that we say during the weekday, because the intermediate blessings of the Shemona Esrei are not said on Shabbos and Yantif. On Shabbos and Yantif, you only see the first three and the last three, and to replace the middle 12, you just have one blessing about the Shabbos or the Yantif. So, V'amar Rabbi Ami says, Gedola Dea Shenitna Ben Shtei Osios. Great is this type of mental ability because it's given between two of God's names. Shenemar Kikel Deo Tashem. Like it says, God is a God of knowledge. But the way it's saying is God is a God of knowledge. It's surrounded by God's name. This is the punchline that I'm, for our purposes, whoever doesn't have this type of mental ability, it's forbidden to have compassion on them. Now, this is very problematic, the idea of not being able to be compassionate to someone. So let's first talk a little bit about what is it that this person is lacking, that the Talmud would be so severe to say you can't have compassion on them. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of das. So there's a certain danger that some people have that their mental abilities lack any type of discretion between what's really right or wrong. It might sound, for example, like a good spiritual person says they have no judgment for anyone in the world. So right away, as a Jew, we jump right away to Hitler. We say, what about Hitler? Like, well, I understand that he came from a particular place, and once you would understand where he came from, you'd be able to empathize with him. In fact, many very evolved spiritual leaders are exactly like that. They don't have das. They don't have das is a discretion to understand that an ideology that doesn't understand that Hitler is Hitler, you can't feel bad for those people. Meaning those people are dangerous. They are empowering the Hitlers of the world because they just always have a way of being able to explain how nobody is responsible for anything, and you should never feel judging for in other words, they judge the judge. So if you'd be judging Hitler, you become the guilty one. Yeah, so I know it sounds like an extreme example, but it's not really that extreme because there's a lot of people out there who are able to do that type of game. So the Gemara is telling us something very important. If somebody doesn't have das, you can't be compassionate to them. Why? Because all you're doing is that you're empowering their mishugas. And I'll put it a little more bluntly. It's not just a punishment. Well, the person isn't that smart, have compassion on them anyway. It's much more than that. When you have compassion for that person when they're thinking or not thinking correctly like that, what you're doing is you're not actually teaching them right from wrong. You've implanted this type of ability to discern between good and bad in a person's heart, God. If we, as God's partners in creation, go around treating people who don't have that distinction between ability to decipher between right or wrong in their either naturally or learned, we are part of in this encouraging people to lack discretion. And therefore, you can't, if you have compassion on those people, you're allowing them to hurt other people and even themselves. Example would be, if you know somebody is taking the money, right, and buying drugs with it. Okay, but they're asking you for money. How could you say no to a person? Right? So the answer is you're just giving an addict something that they're eventually going to kill themselves with. And therefore, your compassion isn't even compassion. You think it's your need to feel good about yourself. But what's the effect? The effect is the opposite of what you think it's going to be. And that could be one way of understanding of asur l'rachem. It's forbidden to have compassion on somebody who's lacking das. There's a lot more on this. Maybe one time I'll share with you the teachings of Rabbi Yerucham, one of the great Balie Musar, the Mir Mashkiach, who has some wonderful teachings on this. But now let's go on to number 4. Number 4 is, what was the original institution of havdalah? Umar says the following. Rabbi Akiva says that you say the havdalah in the Shmoneh Esrei as the 4th blessing. The Tanakhama says you say it as part of the 4th blessing, not as its own blessing. Let's take a look. Anshe Knesset Hagdola tiknu lahem liyisrael brachot v'tfilot kedushot v'havdalot. The men of the Great Assembly instituted for Israel blessings, prayers, kedusha, right, like we say in the Shmoneh Esrei, maybe even kaddish, or the other forms of kedusha, v'havdalot and havdalah. They're all plural, and because there are different types of havdalah, even though there really is only one havdalah, the liturgy of the havdalah is not always the same, but it's often the same. Nechsi heichan tikun. Well, let's take a look how they instituted it. So, Amalei. So here's how the history went. Bitchila kavua bitfila. Originally, they did not institute that we make havdalah on a cup of wine. They just simply instituted that it be said as part of the Shmoneh Esrei, the Saturday night prayer. Shiru, we became wealthy, then kavua alakos. Then they instituted that it be said on a cup of wine. Then, unfortunately, he'anu, we became impoverished at some point. That's not giving us the exact time frame of when that happened, when we became rich, when we became poor. And that might have some significance in a moment, we'll see. Chazur v'kavur b'tefillah. Then they went back and reenacted that it didn't have to be done on the cup of wine, rather it could be done as it was originally instituted within the context of the Mariv, the evening prayer on Saturday night. V'heim amru hamavdol b'tefillah tzarach shiavdol al hakos. And they said, at some point they couldn't just have a seesaw. This is how some of the commentaries explain this line. Between if we're rich, we make havdalah on a cup of wine. If we're poor, and who's to say when we're rich and when we're poor and when the economic collapse is official and when the recession is then over? We can't keep track of that. So they eventually said, just do both, because we're not going to go back and forth. From now on, you'll just do both. So Itmarnami, Amar Chia Bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, a very similar thing like we just said. Anshek Nesagdol, Tiknu Lem Yisrael, Brachos, Asfilos, Kedushot, havdalah, Bechil Kavam, Betfila, Heshir Kvol Akos, Chaziv Ha'anu Kivol Tfila, Ve'inamru Hamad Betfila Tzach Shiavda Alakos, Itmarnami, Rabbi Yosef, Termitavaya, Hamad Betfila Tzach Shiavda Alakos. Okay. And that's good. So that's what we said, that if you do, even though you did it in the prayer, you have to also make it on a cup. Amarava umasvina nashmaitan. And they asked, Tavalo hiskir gzvura geshamim b'tchiyat samesim. Okay, so the Gemara is going to ask a question. So the question, there's a few questions here. There's a few questions. Why would we make, like if it's something that was originally done as a prayer, why change it? Just because we had money, what happened that we wanted to then make it on a cup? And once we made it on a cup, why were we able to change it back? And meaning what? Furthermore, what's the relationship between kiddush and havdalah? We know we make kiddush on a cup of wine. Now, presumably, it doesn't have the same type of brisa that says originally the kiddush was instituted to be made as part of the prayer on Friday night, and then we became rich, and then the rabbi said make kiddush on wine, and then we became poor. There isn't this equivalent story about wine. We know that they instituted kiddush because it says, the same brisa says they instituted kiddush. It says they instituted the davening. Now, even some of the commentaries say, well, it doesn't mean they instituted the essence of kiddush. The essence of kiddush could have been before they instituted it. It just wasn't institutionalized. It was just whatever way a person would do it, they would do it. It wasn't part of a formal prayer service. But that's part of the question. The Gemara is going to explore a little bit of that as we go on, particularly to number 6, okay? But before we get to number 6, we have to take a diversion that's actually part of this to number 5, which is the Torah tells us not to take God's name in vain, and the Gemara wants to say that could mean somebody who says a blessing that's unnecessary. The question is that for real? Can you really say that just because you made a bracha that's unnecessary, it's like you took God's name in vain, a biblical prohibition of a serious magnitude? So let's look at that in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, in the context of discussing kind of the history of the havdalah, at one point, it's not clear that even when they reinstituted this doing both, if it really was that you needed to do both or you had the option to do one or the other for a while. Eventually, we know the law is that you do both. But at some point, it may very well have been that it wasn't clear whether you had to do both. You were able to do one of your choosing before the rabbis just came down, so you just do both. So in that context, the Gemara says, the Gemara asks a question. Rabbi Yochanan Shakish Amitarvayu, Kol mevarach bracha she'ein tzricha over mishum lo sisa. Anybody who makes a blessing that's unnecessary violates the prohibition against taking God's name in vain. So, at face value, if you were to take that reading at face value, anytime you made a bracha levatala, anytime you made a bracha that didn't need to be made, you're making a major violation. In fact, almost all the commentaries say that it's like an asmachta. An asmachta means it's a rabbinic form of support from a biblical verse, a biblical prohibition in this case, but it doesn't mean that you actually are violating the biblical prohibition. They like to, it's just a rabbinic prohibition, and we like to link it with a more serious prohibition. Not that it actually becomes that, but just to kind of like teach us this idea. And that's the majority of the commentators. The one very significant commentator who seems to take it at face value, although some people try to explain that he really doesn't, but that's Maimonides. So it could be why there's some people who are particularly strict when it comes to, if you don't have clarity if you made a bracha or not, we say safek brachas lahakel. If you're in doubt about whether you're required to make a bracha, or you might have made it, so you then you should be lenient and not do it. So some people say, okay, that makes sense because brachot in general are rabbinic, with very few exceptions. Blessings are rabbinic enactments. And we just learned that tefillah and kiddush, havdalah, all those things. At least the words that we use are rabbinic, and so you're not, many rabbinic laws, if you're in doubt, you don't have to do them a second time or possibly a second time. But here, according to what we're saying, it's much more than that, especially according to Maimonides. If there's actually a prohibition against making a blessing that's not unnecessary, so then it's not that you could make the blessing again, but you're not required to. You're not allowed to make the blessing again. Interestingly enough, Rambam does paskin, which is based on the Gemara, so he's just not making it up, that if you didn't know whether you said the Shema or not in the morning, you would recite the Shema with its blessings, which is problematic because we usually say safek brachas lahakel. And I actually did that in an earlier shir. I don't remember which daf it was on, so you can look it up. I think it's in the teens of Brachot. Okay, let's go on to number 6. Number 6 is, if you ate before havdalah, you didn't do the atachon antanu. You didn't insert the prayer for havdalah in the fourth blessing of atachonin in the Ma'ariv Amidah Saturday night. You didn't do that, and you didn't make havdalah, and you started eating Saturday night after Shabbos. What do you have to do? So the Gemara says on the bottom of Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph and the top of Lamed Gimel Amud Beis, Ta bezu v'zu mahu. What's the law if you made you forgot both, and then according to Rabbi Yonah and other of the Rishonim, you ate. Amar le ta bezu v'zu chos l'rosh. In that case, you go back to the beginning, meaning you start by davening Ma'ariv a second time. You already daven Ma'ariv. You daven a second time to make atachon antanu, which is strange because it seems to contradict many things in earlier sources that say for atachon antanu you don't go back because you're going to make havdalah anyway. But because you didn't make havdalah before eating, you're kind of being punished. At least that's one way of looking at it. I want to explore another way. Amar le Ravina l'Rava hilchasamai. What is the law? Amar le ki kiddush. The law is like kiddush. I'm going to share with you a little bit of a thought of Rabbi Soloveitchik on this. Ma kiddush afagaf de mikadesh bitzloisa. Just like kiddush. Kiddush, you already, technically speaking, during the Amidah Friday night, you already said mikadesh Yisrael v'Shabbat. You already sanctified Shabbos. But nevertheless, mikadesh akasa, you still make kiddush on a cup of wine Friday night. Af havdalah nami, so to havdalah, we also do the same. Af gaf the mavdil b'tzlaisa, even though you're going to go back and do Shemona Esrei and do atachonen, ladam das, and atachon antanu in atachonen, which is the havdalah of the Shemona Esrei. Mavdil akasa, you still make havdalah on the kos. Rabbi Soloveitchik suggests the following. I'm going to put in my own words, so if you don't, it's from Rishimas Shiurim. You want to look it up on this daf from a beautiful, one of the great masterpieces on Talmud, written in our lifetime, still being written by my dear friend, one of my teachers, Rabbi Herschel Reichman of Yeshiva University, one of the Rosh Yeshivas. It's a master work on many of the tractates based on Rabbi Soloveitchik's Shiurim. So basically, what we have here is, if you look at kiddush, and this is based on the Gemara in Psachim. You know what? I'll open up the Rishimas Shiurim so I can quote some of the Talmudic quotes that Rabbi Soloveitchik quotes, in case anybody here, or at least later, or even now, is like, oh, let me look that up. That sounds interesting. So there is a Gemara in Shabbos and a Gemara in Psachim that fill in a lot about havdalah. So one of them is Psachim Daf Kuf Hey Amid Aleph, Rabbi Chanina Bar Shlima, and the Talmidei of Rav. They were having Su'uda, and Rabbi Hamnuna was standing over them, the old Rabbi Hamnuna, who's featured prominently in the Zohar. And they said, go and let's take a look and see if it's time to make kiddush. It's Friday night. If it is, we'll interrupt they were already eating before Shabbos. Shabbos is coming in. It wasn't like today, you just looked at the clock. They'd go outside and see what was going on. Said, if Shabbos is about to come in, we'll interrupt our meal, and then we'll start again. Like they would formally end everything, and then they would like set the table again and restart it, right? So one of the rabbis said, no, it's unnecessary. Shabbasa kava nasha. The Sabbath institutes itself. Now, it doesn't mean that they could literally just carry on eating. They would just have to make kiddush, or perhaps cover the food, or cover the challah, and then make kiddush. But they didn't have to stop eating in a formal way, like end the meal. They could just interrupt for a moment just to make kiddush, essentially. And they explain themselves a little bit. Now, havdalah, they wanted to say that just like kiddush Shabbos makes you able to make kiddush without anything else really, havdalah would be the same Saturday night. And Amarle Rav Amram Hachi Amarav the kiddush kovas lo lahavdalah kovas. They said no, that only works for kiddush. That does not work for havdalah. So what that means is that they thought that when Saturday night begins, when it's no longer Shabbos, the fact that it's no longer Shabbos would mean that you can no longer eat. In other words, we want to create a distinction between Shabbos and the week, both when it comes in and when it goes out. So they're the same and not the same. That's what we're really talking about. How kiddush is the same as havdalah and how they're not. What's the distinction we make? And this will explain a bunch of questions I asked in number 4 about the original institution of havdalah, how it is and isn't like kiddush, why we don't find the same discussion about how they made kiddush and then they got rich and they made it differently that we find by havdalah. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that now. And so let's explore a little bit about what Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying and how I'm going to apply it to answer these other questions. When Rabbi Soloveitchik says somewhere that when you make kiddush on Friday night, it's not just that you are sanctifying the Shabbos by saying that it's holy. You're also sanctifying, it's turning Friday night into Shabbos. I think that's a tagline from National Jewish Outreach Program. Great tagline. And turn Friday night into Shabbos could be more like turn Friday night dinner into Shabbos dinner. That's like a halachic thing here. In other words, how do you make that the dinner that you're having now is no longer dinner that happens to be on Shabbos, but it's a Suda Shabbos. It's part of the mitzvah, part of the kiyum of the oneg Shabbos, the joy of Shabbos, and that is instituted through kiddush on the cup. That's why they never had an initial institution of kiddush just in the prayer. When they instituted kiddush in prayer and the cup simultaneously. Why? Because they understood that the kiddush Friday night, you're having dinner on Friday night. It's part of Suda Shabbos. So why not be koveya the Suuda with the kedusha, with sanctity through kiddush on the cup, as opposed to the havdalah? They weren't rich. They weren't necessarily, they did eat on Saturday night, but it wasn't a Suda mitzvah. It was whatever, that you're hungry, you eat a little bit or not. So therefore, although they say Rav Moshe, even when he was very old and he could hardly eat, he would force himself to eat a little bit on Matzah Shabbos, because it's a Suda of David Malka Mashiach, the fourth Suda, the Suda of Matzah Shabbos is an important thing. But it's not such a big deal in the Gemara. The Gemara, the real thing is the Suda on Shabbos, and Friday night in particular is the real Suda. The Shabbos day is good, but not as important in terms of the Kiddush. In terms of Kiddush, it's Friday night. That's when Shabbos comes in, that's when you make Kiddush. So the havdalah is different than Friday night, but it's the same. How is it the same? Rabbi Soloveitchik says that b'payil right now, we link it with food. We don't want to eat weeknight, Saturday night food until we've made havdalah. In other words, you think about, like, let's say kiddushin and gerushin. In personal marital status, to get married, you need kiddushin, and to get divorced, you need a gerushin, a get. They almost say the same things in their opposite. Meaning, in the Kiddushin, you say, Harayat Mekudeshasli. You are unique unto me. In the Gerushin, you say, Harayat Muteres L'cholam. It's the opposite. So in a sense, the Havdalah is the Kedusha of Shabbos. The sanctity of Shabbos is like the Kiddushin. You are special to me. You're a special day, and you make it on a kos. And when you eat, that's no longer regular food. That's Sudas Shabbos, Friday night. Saturday night, when you say goodbye, you say, okay, we separate Hamavdil ben Kaddish L'chol. God, you made a separation. That's why I say Atachon and L'adam Das. We have the distinction to understand differences between the unholy and the regular. It's not that the regular is bad, but it doesn't have the kedusha of Shabbos. It's called. Therefore, we make havdalah. Havdalah is exactly like kiddush and exactly the opposite of kiddush. Now, Rabbi Soloveitchik doesn't give the mashal of the kiddushin and the gerushin. So I just want to, in case you look for that and you don't find it, you won't. It's not his thing. But his thing is that he focuses on the similarity. I'm focusing on how it is similar, and I'm adding in a lot of the differences. He doesn't really talk about here the differences between the Kiddush so much, just in quoting that Gemara that mentions it a little bit. But I wanted to give that idea to you, both in the name of Rabbi Soloveitchik, with some additional points there about how, even though it's similar, like Rabbi Soloveitchik is the one who says it's similar, but I'm the one who's saying it's similar, but it's also very different in that one is desanctifying and the other one is as opposed to Friday night, and that's why there are some differences possibly in the history of these two things. Okay, so that's number 7. That's number 6. Number 7 is about times that the halacha isn't just like what's written in a book. It's a little bit more complicated than just like this is the halacha and that's it. So the Gemara says in number 7, there's an extended conversation. We know the halacha. We actually know the halacha now because now the art scroll is the halacha, meaning the siddur is the halacha. But back then, in the time of this Gemara, it seemed like it wasn't clear what the halacha is. So at the point that they wanted to say that what's the halacha in terms of this debate on Shabbos that goes into Yantif, Shabbos that goes into Yantif. So in a sense, you make some form of havdalah on Saturday night, but it's not in the full Shemon Esrei because it's a Yantif Shemon Esrei. So that's the context the Gemara is talking about. So the Gemara says, Amar le lav halacha itmar elamatin itmar. Didmar Yitzchak bar Avdimi Amar Mishum Rabbeinu halacha v'amir lamatin Rabbi Yochanan Amar modim v'Rab Chia bar Abba Amar nirin. 4 descriptions of the same case of how the rabbi would rule. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of the case because the bottom line is that all of those opinions are ultimately rejected. But it's just the paradigm of 4 different ways of ruling in the same case. And Rashi explains it very nicely. Rashi says, it's dark here, so it's hard to see. So the Rashi says, Man de Amar Halacha Darshinan Lo Bepirkan. According to the opinion, it says that's the law. That's what the rabbi would give a lecture on it in the public arena of where lectures are given for people, for one and all. That's how they conveyed things. Now it would be the equivalent of printing it in a Shulchan Aruch or some code. Man de Amar Matin. Midrash Lo Dashin, the one says that we lean towards that, is we wouldn't give a public lecture on that, Barabim, Aval Uri Marinan Liyachid Lasos, Karbalaza Biyantish Cholios Be'echa B'Shabbos. That's how we would give an individual person who would come and ask us, we would give him that ruling as a private ruling, but it wouldn't be announced to the world. Umanda Amar Nirin, Urinami Lo Marina. We wouldn't even let an individual person who asked us, we wouldn't tell them that. The Avid Lo Mahadrinan. But if they did that, we'd say, okay, you don't have to do it again. The point is you've got 4 different ways of opinions of what to do in this particular case. I'm not going to get into the details of this particular case. Please look it up if you're interested. It is very relevant to understanding this page of Talmud, but due to time constraints, I'm going to use it more as what is the rabbi's role, and can artificial intelligence replace rabbis? And for that matter, can the Shulchan Aruch replace a rabbi? One of the things that many rabbis encounter, especially early on, is they come to a community, they're the rabbi of the community, and one of the members of the community says, Rabbi, you're doing things wrong. You're like, I am? What's wrong? And they'll say, it says in the Shulchan Aruch, X, Y, and Z, and you're not doing it. You're not following it. Now, between you and me, there's a lot of things it says in the Shulchan Aruch. There's a lot of things in the Talmud. We don't do them. That's the difference between the rabbi and the layperson. The rabbi is supposed to know a lot more than the layperson in terms of Jewish customs and practices. So a lot of times what happens is the rabbi doesn't know the answer, meaning the rabbi knows that we do things the way we do certain things, doesn't know why, because that's the way they were trained. They didn't learn everything as a lecture and everything. They were just taught those things. But that's really, the rabbi knows a certain tradition of things that are not in writing. So that's why I have a yeshiva. I study with 12 rabbinical students who already have smicha, they already have the basic ordination, and the goal in the program, and any real good smicha program, is to be that here's how to help people know what the halacha is as teachers of the halacha, as rabbis, as future rabbis in various communities. Here's how you have to tell people what they should be doing in a respectful way, in a kind way, but a way that's clear, and a way that's concise, and a way that engages people and doesn't overwhelm them. However, what if they have a question or something went wrong? There may be a different answer, right? What you learn mostly in rabbinical school is to help somebody out who has a question because they didn't follow the halacha. They made usually inadvertently, you made a mistake in the kitchen. So a lot of times you get a question, and there's sometimes you say the answer is different than what you would have told people in the manual, meaning the manual of what is okay and what isn't okay is usually stricter than the particular question that a person brings after the fact, after they already did something that they probably shouldn't have done according to the manual. So that's the job of the rabbi, is to help their congregants. And can a robot be a rabbi? My son gave a lecture on this last Shavuos. And his answer is that there's a human quality of being a rabbi, of answering a question that isn't just based on information. I don't want to say it's prophecy, because it isn't prophecy. It is knowledge. It is learning. But there's some factoring in that can't be fully explained simply by artificial intelligence, simply by data analysis. There's a lot of that. But there's something very human about being a rabbi. And therefore, for now, a rabbi is still a human being and shouldn't be replaced by a robot or artificial intelligence. So that's a little bit about the kind of toolkit of halacha and the complexities of halacha. This really needs to be a shir in and of itself, but that's enough for now. That was number 7. Now number 8 is Maimonides versus Nachmanadies on whether it's ethical to be a vegan. Okay, let's see whether it's ethical to be a vegan. So the Mishnah on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis says the following. Ha'omer al kain sipor, somebody who says about a bird's nest, a mother bird with baby birds. Yagiu rachamecha, you God, who have compassion on the mother bird and the baby birds, right? Because there's a mitzvah not to take the mother bird and baby birds together. First you send away the mother bird before you take the chicks or the eggs. Val tov yizach shemecha, modim mishatkin also. 3 times you silence a person. And one of them is the person who says, the God who has compassion on the mother bird and the baby birds, right? The Gemara says, Bishlam modim mishatkin also mishum demersi kishtei shiyot. It makes sense that we quiet the person who says, thank God twice, because it looks like he's thanking 2 gods. Val tov yizach shemecha, and we silence the person who says we thank the God that does good. Nami mashma latov v'lo, because that person only wants to thank God for good things, but not acknowledge that bad things also come from God, and that's wrong. Although that's not so simple at all. But For now it is. It's not chayvan al levarach al hara k'shem shevarach al tova. We've learned that a person has to praise God not just for the good, make a bracha not just for the good, but also for the bad. However, el al kain tzipri ger achamecha. But what about the person who prays that the same God who's compassionate on the mother bird and the chicks should extend His mercy towards us? My timer. Why? What's wrong with saying that? So the Gemara offers two alternative explanations. Pligi ba tre Amorai, in the name of two Amoraim, b'Marava, Rabbi Yossi and Rabavin, and Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida. These are the rabbis that argue about it. Chad Amar, one says, Shematel kina b'maisa bereshis. Because Shematel kina, because you're creating enmity between different creatures. Why is that? Because we're saying that God has compassion to these creatures at this time, but to the other creatures, you don't. You do whatever you want to them. So, okay, that's one opinion. Let's do the second opinion, and then I'm going to talk about Maimonides and Nachmanadies' debate about this. The second reason is because that person who's saying God of compassion on the birds should be compassionate on me is making the mitzvahs about God's compassion, but ultimately we don't understand. God isn't a human being. For us, the mitzvahs have to ultimately be about the will of God that's beyond our understanding. And this person is trying to bring it into kind of human terms. So those are the two explanations. So, Maimonides in Moreh Nevuchim, in his Guide to the Perplexed, says the following. Maimonides says that the truth is that there's two opinions, according to Maimonides at least, about whether or not we're allowed to ascribe reason to the mitzvot. So let's just assume that one of these opinions that we just read says you can't ascribe rationale or human attributes onto the divine will. But there's another opinion that says to more or less a degree, we can begin to kind of understand the ways of God in terms of what the mitzvot are for, the purpose of the mitzvot. So Maimonides says we've come on the side that you can begin to explain the rationale for the mitzvot. It's not that you can always explain it, but you can often explain it. And therefore the Rambam says there is an element here that we should say, God is teaching us how to be compassionate towards animals. Maybe He doesn't want to ask too much of us, but He's beginning to ask by saying, have compassion on the mother bird. But if we extrapolate that any further, you'd say maybe it would be better if you'd be a vegetarian. Now, it seems that Maimonides is contradicting our Gemara, because the Gemara only gives two explanations, and one explanation is that there is a reason, but you're creating enmity, meaning you're saying God has mercy, but only on this situation and not another. And you're going to make some of the animals feel bad, whatever that means. Or there is no reason, don't give it a reason. So Maimonides, I guess, is going with the first one, and he's not so concerned about one. So he's saying, you're going to make the animals feel bad. So you know what? Don't make them feel bad. Become a vegetarian, become a vegan. That's Maimonides. Nachmanadies, on the other hand, I mentioned earlier when I was giving the kind of overview of the top 10, is sometimes somebody from a non-religious background becomes a Balie Teshuva, and they move into a religious community, they meet very religious people, and they're a vegan. By the way, many of the reasons why they're Balie Teshuva, I really believe this, is the health food movement, and particularly the vegetarian movement, allowed a certain okay with people to eat differently than the mainstream America, to be aware of what they're eating. And in the process, those people, those vegetarians, basically kept kosher. It's not exactly kosher, but by becoming a vegetarian, vegan, you're practically, I'm not saying it's kosher 100%, but it's a lot closer to kosher than regular people. once you start keeping kosher, even if you don't know it, your spiritual antenna is raised. And sometimes these people come, and nobody understands in the frum world that a regular person to become religious, there's something had to be different. Not necessarily a bad difference, it could be a good difference. This could be one of them, is that they were basically keeping kosher since they became vegetarian. And now they come into, Brooklyn or Queens, and they're told, a frum Jew is not a vegetarian. A frum Jew, v'samachta b'chagecha, you have to rejoice on the Yom Tov, you should eat meat. First of all, that's wrong. V'samachta b'chagecha, if you like meat and you eat meat, then you eat it on Yom Tov. Okay, that's amaratzis. Most people don't know that. But there is this Nachmanadies, that's true. Nachmanadies says if you start saying, well, it's more ethical to be a vegan or vegetarian, then you're saying the Torah is unethical. You're saying the Torah has only a couple little ethics when it comes to caring for animals, very limited, the mother bird, not very much. Other than that, the Torah is unethical. So Nachmanadies has an issue with somebody using ethics to decide whether they're a vegetarian or not. Again, I'm not saying he says it's forbidden. He doesn't say that. I don't want to put words into his mouth. But at least he gives if anything, Nachmanadies does have a rationale that we should be environmentalists. Because Nachmanadies says that he could understand, perhaps, there is a logical element, according to Nachmanadies, possibly, of not eating the mother bird and the baby birds or taking them together. And it has to do with causing the destruction of a species. Meaning when you take two generations together, it's a massive level of destruction. It means you lack sensitivity to keep that species alive. And he says, we should learn out from here that it's forbidden to cause a species to be destroyed. So if anything, Nachmanadies also has a reason to be compassionate to the rainforest and so on and so forth. But there is some little element in Nachmanadies that ostensibly would argue with Maimonides about whether or not it's ethical to be a vegan or a vegetarian, or you want to be a vegan vegetarian, it's your problem, do it, gesund to hate, it's maybe better for the planet. But ethics, we can't really fully comprehend the ethics of animal cruelty, because if we really believe that you can't harm an animal, then the Torah is okay with it, and that's problematic to Nachmanadies. Okay, something to think about. And finally, number 9 and number 10, are you finished praising God? The pitfalls of creativity in spiritual practice. Let's take a look at the Talmud on that. Okay, the Gemara says, Hahu dinachas kamei Rab Chanina. There was somebody praying in front of Rabbi Chanina. I guess he was the chazan or whatever he was, and he said, Hakel hagadol hagibar v'hanara, which is the standard liturgy that we say. But then he continued, V'ha'adir v'ha'izuz v'ha'yaroi ha'chazak v'ha'amitz v'ha'vadai v'ha'nichbad. So he said, God, the Gadol, the great God, the strong God, right? And then he started adding in all these phrases, right? He started saying strong and mighty and feared and powerful and very strong and, respected and so on. So Himtin Lo, so the Rabbi Chanina, waited adisayim till he completed all his praying. Kisayim amarle siam taro l'kulu. When he did finish, he said, "Did you really finish l'kulu shvachi demarach? All the praise of your master?" In other words, you can't. If you start praising God in your own words, you can never say enough because God is infinite. So lamali kulahai, why do you add in this things? Why do you say so much? Anan hani tlas daminan. The three things that we do say, Akel agadol gibar v'hanora, ilav daminu Moshe Rabbeinu ba'oraisa. If Moses, our master, didn't teach it in the Torah, Basa Ashik Nesas Agdol V'Skinu, and the men of the Great Assembly come and institute it in the Amidah. We couldn't say that at all. And you're adding on, saying more. Mashal Melech Basar V'Dam Shahil Elef Alafim Dinar Zav. It's like a king that had millions of golden coins. And you're praising him about his silver coins. It's repugnant to the king. In other words, if you're going to praise God, you have to go beyond any words. So the very fact that we do use words is because those words were mandated by the Torah and they were established by the men of the Great Assembly. This leads me to talk a little bit about there's a lot to be said about spiritual people, because part of spirituality is often creativity, which means that the person would want to come up with their own creative spiritual practice. Now, there's a theory about Jewish spiritual practice is that whatever great Jewish spiritual practice there is needs to always be weighed out against this kind of concept of like, are you veering away too far from what the rabbis instituted? Because if you are, no matter how nice it sounds, it's not good enough. And it's something that put it this way. We need to have creativity in Jewish spiritual practices, but that creativity can't be at the expense of being able to kind of recognize what it is that we're doing. The change can't be like wholesale change until that we don't have one Shmon Esrei. The idea of a matbea shel tefillah, like a form, like a siddur that we pray out of, or before there was a siddur, these are the words that we pray out of, has a powerful unifying feature. Once we all go our own ways, it's like, is it really good enough? Meaning, once you're going to make your own liturgy, are you really going to sum up what needs to be summed up? You did better and you did worse. Meaning, it's not. There's a pitfall in adding. Kol hamosif goreh. Whoever adds sometimes subtracts. So now I sound like a very, rabbi that wants everything to be uniform and the same. And as those of you who know me know that I am into creativity and don't want everybody to be a cookie cutter. Yet there is this tension between the two, and we bear in mind that tension, and we are creative within certain limits so that our creativity could ultimately be reabsorbed into the beauty of continuity and community. Because if everything was just about individual creation, so then it's very hard to have continuity and community within that context. So just keep that in mind when you're going and creating. Now for number 10, which is all in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven. What's not such a big deal about the fear of heaven, and what makes it so important. So let's take a look at number 10 here in the Gemara. So this is Rabbi Chanina's, it's his page here. He says, everything is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven. Shinemar, as it says, Va'ata Yisrael, now Israel, Ma Hashem Elokecha Shal Meimach Ki'im Li'ira Osa, Li'ira. What is God asking of you but to fear Him? So the Gemara asks, Atu Yira Shamayim Milsa Sutrasa. The Torah is saying, like, what's the big deal? But the Gemara asks, is really the fear of heaven such a small thing? Va'amar Rabbi Chanina Mishum Rabbi Shimon Ben Yochai, Ein lo lakadosh baruch hu bebeis kanasav ela otza shel yira shamayim. God has nothing in His storage house except for the storage of the fear of heaven. So the Gemara says, like it says, the fear of heaven, that's His That's his wealth. That's his store. That's what he stores up in his heavenly places. And the Gemara says, in the Gabe Moshe, Milsa Zirtusahi, yes, for Moses it's a small matter. When you ask somebody for an expensive vessel and he has it, Domalov Kli Katan, it's like nothing, it's like insignificant. Katan ve'enlo, if you ask somebody for a small thing, like a plastic cup, ve'enlo, and he doesn't have it, Domalov Kli Gadol, then it's like something of significance. Okay, let me explain this a little bit. So, what is this fear of heaven? So first of all, there's a whole discussion in Ishbitz that I'm not going to talk about because it's such a big thing. I talked a little bit about it last week, but I'm not going to really talk about it this week, about the seeming contradiction between this particular passage in the Talmud and the Meir Shiloh statement that Kol b'dei Shemayim ba'afilu Yerushalmi. But that's not what I'm talking about here. What I am talking about is this idea of Yirat Shamayim, the fear of heaven, being a small thing and a big thing. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this for a moment. If, for example, you have toilet paper, a lot of it, how important is it? It's not important. You don't think about it at all. If all of a sudden there's a shortage of toilet paper, what do you think about? I need toilet paper. How am I going to live without toilet paper? The same thing is like that for anything, meaning water, oxygen, health, a relationship, anything that you had and you kind of took for granted, it's a small thing that will be big when you don't have it. But, there's a big but here. Imagine, I say, I went shopping this morning. I had a delivery. And I've got so many rolls of toilet paper. Thank God I'm good. I don't have to worry about anything right now. My life is perfect because I have so much. I went from having a half a roll to having 32 rolls. It's actually only 12 rolls, but it says it's like 32 rolls. Gewalt. I'm sitting pretty. I'm good. I'm happy. So I'm a fool. Because I have something that's only important when I don't have it. Toilet paper is not important unless you don't have it. So sometimes you find someone who has fear of heaven and not much else. Compared to Moses, that person hasn't really accomplished very much at all. Meaning, what have they done? They haven't done anything wrong, but what have they done with that? Nothing at all. So it's like somebody it's like you have the job and the house and the wife and the kids and your respected person in the community. Those are all very good things. But what have you done beyond that? So for somebody who doesn't have a job or a home or something like that, they're focused on what they don't have and they wish they had it and they're trying to get it. But for somebody who has that but doesn't really go beyond that, it belies the kind of potential that we have for greatness and just settling for mediocrity because you have the vessel. If you don't have, now I have a much, 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 much better way of explaining this that I've used before. So I'm just going to explain it to all of you from the depth of awareness of what is wrong with me. What's wrong with me? I have a lot of things wrong with me, but one of the things I have that's wrong with me is that I don't believe in saving money. I don't create a mechanism. It's not that I don't believe in it spiritually. I just don't care to implement creating a real way of putting money away. And as long as I do that, the money is going to come in. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes a little less. It's going to go out. So sometimes a little more stays in the bank for a little longer, sometimes a lot longer, sometimes not good. But I don't have a serious methodology of as soon as the money comes in, X amount of it goes into some type of savings account that can't be touched till retirement. I don't do that. Now, let's say I did that. Would that make me a rich person? No, it would not. It would just mean I have a retirement account. So compared to somebody who has a retirement account that's always been putting away, I'm doing terribly. But compared to a wealthy person who not only saves money, but also reinvests it wisely and makes huge returns on it, even if I would have had saved money, it's not real money. So that's what the Talmud is telling us. Yira Shemayim, fear of heaven, is not a big deal for Moses. Moses is very rich in his spiritual accomplishments. So he has much more than just fearing heaven. He has a deep relationship with God. The fear of heaven is like the idea of knowing how to save. But accomplishing something spiritually fantastic like Moses is knowing how to invest with your savings. You understand the difference? So that's what the Gemara is telling us. The Gemara is telling us that on the one hand, it's a small thing for Moses because Moses does so much more than just save money spiritually. He's expansive in his relationship with God. But what's the foundation that he has that everyone who wants to have money ultimately needs? And this is not about money. This is a mashal. This is about spirituality. But you can't have spirituality without Yirat Hashem. However you want to feel today and jump up and down spiritually, if you have no Yirat Hashem, that spirituality will just kind of go down the drain. So Yirat Hashem is the otzer. The otzer is the bank account, the retirement account, so to speak, that can hold the mitzvot in it. But that doesn't mean you put a lot of mitzvot into it. It just means whatever little mitzvot you have, you put in a mitzvah a month, so to speak, in the mitzvah bank. So for Moses, it's not a big deal. It's very high for the rest of us. For other people who look at people who are not sinners, and we're like, wow, that person's a tzaddik. Did they do much with being a tzaddik? No, they just did no harm. It's better than nothing. It's a lot. So that's maybe what the Talmud is telling us, and looking forward to continuing. We have more learning this week because it's Shavuos. I'm doing a Zoom lesson that's going on right now, but I'll be on at 10:45, and also, of course, to Wednesday we have a great program. So I hope to see you again. Okay, take care.